Hey guys, this is Future Jay here popping on to let you know that I didn't find out until after I finished filming everything that the batteries in my microphone died. So it's a silent movie, and since you can't unfix or repair, it's a little difficult to go back in time. So I'm going to narrate over the episode and kind of describe what's happening. Um, it's still all the information's still there. It actually might make the episode a little bit shorter because I won't be rambling on quite as much, but we're just going over how I repaired the spine. I fixed this entire broken piece right here with this special kind of clay that I have. And then I went in to some of the really big, deep gaps and filled those in as well. Anyway, so I guys hope you guys enjoy it. And sorry, I promise I'll watch the microphone next time. All right, so this is the broken part of the spine. The whole vertebrae snapped off when it hit the ground. I'm shining a light in here so you can see how deep it goes because it's pretty deep. This is basically an injection molded plastic piece sitting on top of another injection molded plastic piece, which is the inside of the body. So, of course, they didn't need to fill it and they wanted to make it as lightweight as possible. So the extra air in the cavity didn't really bother the original makers of this. You sure wouldn't want to fill it in because that would add weight to the model. So I'm going to use something to stuff in this hole so that I don't have to use as much clay, which I'm sure that makes sense. You guys are all smart. You understand what I'm doing. So I'm going to use this piece of paper towel to stuff in there. Now, here we go. Here's the clay. This is a Smoothon free-form air. And if you've ever used any of the foam clays that are out there, like the Eva foam clays and whatnot, this is going to feel very similar to that. It's very, very lightweight. The company even talks about and boasts how when you make your finished pieces, if they're a decent enough size, they'll float in water. You can actually sculpt a boat if you want to out of this stuff. So it's really versatile, but now it's a little tricky to use. And what I mean by that is when you first start mixing it up, it's very much like mixing foam clay, except for foam clay is already mixed in its tub. So this one, you're mixing part A and part B, and you mix it by volume, which means you don't need a gram scale or anything. You just have to make a little ball that looks about the same size as the little ball that you make from the other one. The tricky part comes when you're trying to merge them together. It can be a little flaky, like it wants to fall apart until it really properly mixes, and then it's pretty solid. So if you can see here, it's very almost crystalline, the white part is. It's very, very, there's a residue to it. So you don't really want to try to minimize your touch. You don't want to use your hands on this stuff any more than you have to. So I'm wearing gloves here. Now, at some point later on, you're going to notice I take the gloves off. And as much as I say you shouldn't do that, sometimes with this kind of clay, you really have to because it gets to a point where it's very sticky. Okay, so now I'm mixing this up. And what I end up doing, and this turns out to be a benefit later, I mix a little too much of the clay. So at this point, I'm just repairing the vertebrae. I'm not really worried about anything else. So I notice after I fix the vertebrae that, well, I've got some leftover clay. There's some other things that I could do to improve the model. I'm getting a little ahead of myself now, though. So the idea is to mix each ball as evenly as possible. Now, if you don't get it exactly even, will it still dry? Yes, of course it will, unless you wildly mix it. Like one size is twice the size of the other, then you might have some issues with how it catalyzes and how long it takes, depending on which is which. You see here, these two are basically the same size. They're a little misshapen, so it's hard to tell that, they're around the same size. And once you get them, you just start smushing them together. I always kind of take a look at them. I'll roll them around in my hand and say, okay, that looks relatively correct. Or I guess if you had a scale, you could weigh them out. It wouldn't really be much of a difference as long as they're pretty close in size. So I'm just kind of moving everything out of my way. This is where we start to really mix this stuff together. Now, I'll say this. I've used a lot of resin clays. Like if you've ever used Magisculpt or now Smoothon has a couple of others. There's Epoxy Sculpt. I've used a lot of these different clays. And a lot of them are really dense. The really big advantage of this one is how it's not so dense. But there is a trade-off. Now I'm applying it on here. And the biggest trade-off that I can see with this clay is detail time. When you first start using it, you'll notice I'm really pushing it into the mold and I'm kind of pushing it onto the model. And I'm doing that because it's a little tricky to get it to stick right away. It doesn't have that same sticky feeling that some other resin clays do. And you notice I've taken my gloves off now because I've gotten it to stick. And now what I'm doing is I'm mixing water. Water smooths this stuff out like magic. And this is where you can really blend and blend those edges. Think of it like you're doing a prosthetic application. You're blending those edges and making them as smooth as possible. Water does this amazingly, but unfortunately, when you start adding water to this stuff, it gets really sticky on your gloves, and your gloves start sticking, and then you start leaving imprints on the clay, like of the wrinkles in your glove, and it starts adding more work for you. So at this point, it's easier to just dab my fingers in a little bit of water and just smooth everything out. And I'm really starting to fluff it out now. I've got those edges nice and smooth. You can see that looks really good. Really happy with the way that's coming out. Now this is the finished piece. And I've got it turned to the side so you can see how it blends in with the other vertebrae. And it really did turn out quite nice. So here I'm going down the spine. See, you can see these large gaps here. This is where probably from being out in the sun over the years, maybe it's gotten a little warped from the temperature of the sun. Now here in North Carolina in October during Halloween, we'll have 70, maybe sometimes 80 temperature days, and then we'll have the exact opposite the next day, where it's super cold and super windy. So I'm taking the leftover clay that I have, and I'm going to fill these guys in. And I'm not worried about all of the seams. Like, I don't care that I can still see seams from where they join the two pieces of the spine together. That doesn't really bother me. Because, I mean, nobody's believing that this is a giant 9-foot skeleton that was of a real person. And I'm speeding this up a bit so I don't bore you to death because you've already seen me do this once. I just want to fill in those big gaps because I feel like those big gaps could continue to get bigger and could become more of a problem later. Now, we're all done. And the gaps look nice. Our fix and repair looks really good. I'm really happy with the way the clay dried and turned out. So this looks great. But by now you guys are pretty familiar with how I do my painting, so I'm not going to go into all the detail on that again. The only thing I'm really going to show you is how the new material takes the paint versus how just the raw plastic did. So we're just going to start with our wash layer. We don't need too much of it this time, not like last time. We're just going to brush it on. All those places that we added the fix to either the seam or the actual broken part of the skeleton itself, which is pretty much all the way down, as you can see. Okay. A little bit on the sides here. Let's get those. What's nice about it, this material, because it's a porous style clay, it does absorb the material a lot more than regular plastic did, because the plastic is an injection molded plastic. So it just sort of sits on the surface. So when you peel it off, it just kind of comes off a lot easier. With this one, you can actually stain the material a little bit more. Just making sure we get as much of this off as we can. We don't want it to be too dark in some areas. All right, good. I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I add the color on. But yeah, we're looking pretty good. See you in a sec. All right, monster makers, we have our color finished. Now it's time to add a little bit of the dry brushing. Just want to add some of that gray color back in. Not too much. We need a little bit more in this area where we have the full repair, which is right there. Because we had to take so much material out of that one. Yeah. I guess it would help if I poked the
camera in the right spot, wouldn't it?
All right, so here we are. The spine is finished. It's been clear coated. And let me let you guys take a look. There she blows. Got a nice clear coat on it, nice shine to it. Should pick up the light on Halloween really nice. So this is done. Now we're going to get to design the monsters that are going to live inside of the rib cage and sculpt those babies from scratch. That'll be the next video.